Mr. Mayor, friends, fellow members of the City Council, as you know, in less than 2 hours, liquor will be declared illegal by decree of the distinguished gentlemen of our nation's Congress.
At the stroke of midnight on January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment went into effect, ushering in the era of prohibition. From the outset, the amendment faced challenges as underground liquor production sprang up in cities and towns across the country. Speakeasies flourished, and smugglers developed intricate routes. Prohibition inadvertently provided organized crime with the opportunity to expand its influence and power, which was particularly evident in Tampa. One figure in particular would come to dominate the local criminal scene, known as the Dean of the Underworld. Unlike many of his counterparts involved in bootlegging, his empire was built on the illicit lottery game Bolita, making him one of Tampa's most notorious and influential criminal figures. His name was Charlie Wall. Charlie Wall was born on March 10, 1880, the son of Dr. John P. Wall and Matilda McKay. He hailed from a family deeply entrenched in Florida's influential circles, with ties to some of the state's most powerful families. His father was an ex-Confederate Army surgeon who directed the Richmond hospitals during the Civil War and was also internationally recognized for his pioneering yellow fever studies. From 1878 to 1880, Dr. Wall served as mayor of Tampa, concentrating particularly on increasing the maritime trade of the city. Surrounded by the cream of Tampa's high society and the core of its political clubs, young Charlie seemed destined for a life of elite status. However, Wall had different aspirations, choosing to plunge into the underworld instead. His tryst with the darker side of Tampa commenced during his early teenage years. Following his mother's unexpected demise when he was 13 and his father's subsequent remarriage to Louisa Williams in May 1894, Wall found little solace in his new family dynamic. Instead, he sought refuge in saloons and gambling dens, a habit that intensified after his father's passing 2 years later on April 18, 1895. His relationship with his stepmother soured further, culminating in a heated argument during which Wall shot her in the arm with a .22 caliber rifle. Sent to a reform school in an attempt to curb his delinquent behavior, Wall remained unaffected by the experience. A romanticized tale about young Charlie Wall suggests he was expelled for frequenting gambling and brothel houses in North Carolina. However, school records reveal he was actually expelled during his first year at military school for the unremarkable offense of cheating on a test. After his expulsion, he returned to Tampa and, without consistent parental supervision, gravitated back to the seedy establishments he had known before. By the age of 14 or 15, Charlie was dealing craps in a casino in Fort Brooke and running numbers for prominent Bolita dealers in Tampa. These dealers recognized the potential in a criminally inclined boy with connections to the upper class. With his last name, Charlie could access places ordinary criminals could not, such as country clubs, five-star restaurants, upscale bars, and even City Hall, where he sold Bolita numbers. Despite lacking a formal education, Charlie Wall was a savvy businessman, even in his teenage years. He diligently saved every penny, and as his savings grew, he transitioned from working as a runner for Bolita dealers to funding bootleg liquor operations and running his own Bolita games. Charlie Wall's significant move came in 1910 during the cigar workers' strike in Tampa. Sympathetic to their cause, he provided financial support by buying food and covering medical bills, allowing the workers to continue their strike. Although they ultimately lost, the cigar workers' admiration for Wall endured. Capitalizing on the unwavering support of the blue-collar community in Ybor City and West Tampa, Wall began endorsing political candidates, promising to secure votes from these areas. His supporters would vote as he directed and turn a blind eye when he engaged in ballot stuffing or had individuals vote multiple times for his candidates. In exchange for his backing, candidates permitted Wall's Bolita parlors and brothels to operate without any interferences. He also used his influence to shut down any illegal operations not under his control, ensuring nearly every gambling parlor and brothel in Tampa gave him a cut of their profits. Some bolita parlors earned as much as $57,000 on a good night, with Wall taking home half. To further increase his wealth, Wall rigged bolita games to prevent heavily wagered numbers from winning. He used methods such as filling balls with lead to make them sink, or freezing balls to make them easy to find in the bag. Bolita, a form of lottery game widely played throughout Florida, featured a common variant with 100 numbered balls placed in a bag. The balls would be mixed, and one drawn as the winner. With odds of 100 to 1 and bets as low as a penny accepted, bolita gained popularity among the poor and working classes. The game arrived in Tampa in the 1880s, introduced by Manuel Suarez, who brought it from its origins, Cuba. Racketeers quickly capitalized on bolita's popularity, leading to over 300 bolita houses operating in Ybor City by 1927. The game's influence extended beyond Latin neighborhoods, reaching into black communities as well. Charlie Wall was a polarizing figure, earning disdain from some, particularly certain family members who regarded him as the family's black sheep, yet he was adored by others. Wall would scatter bags of coins on hospital lawns for children to find. He took on the persona of a modern-day Robin Hood, often seen traversing Tampa in the latest fashion, sporting a wide-brimmed straw hat, engaging in banter with passers-by, and generously distributing pocketfuls of change. He commanded his criminal empire from a fortified stronghold in the heart of Ybor City, often armed and surrounded by a cadre of bodyguards. But beneath this charismatic facade lurked a darker side. Wall delved into narcotics, eventually succumbing to morphine addiction. Despite a morphine addiction, which he eventually overcame, Charlie Wall would rise to become the czar of Tampa's gambling rackets. In 1928, Isabella Knowles, a former companion of Charlie Wall, approached him seeking morphine to alleviate her withdrawal pains. Charlie wrote a note for her to give to one of his lieutenants, George Saturday Zarate, instructing Zarate to provide her with the morphine. Unbeknownst to them, Knowles was a federal informant, leading to the arrest and charging of both Zarate and Wall for selling narcotics. During the trial, Charlie Wall testified in his own defense, admitting to writing the note but claiming he did so to help Knowles with her withdrawal symptoms. While Zarate received a 10-year prison sentence, Charlie Wall was acquitted. In later years, Wall buried his morphine supply near his home and traveled to Indiana for drug rehabilitation. Although he was known to be associated with these criminal activities, this would be Charlie Wall's most significant encounter with the law throughout his career. He would retain this position as the czar of Tampa's gambling rackets for more than 3 decades by controlling the city's crucial voting precincts. In fact, many believe that during Wall's reign, there wasn't a single honest election in Tampa-Hillsborough County. Wall also maintained his position by eliminating potential rivals. At least 6 competitors met violent ends while attempting to challenge the city's powerful vice lord. However, despite his influential status in Tampa's Latin community, by the early 1930s, Wall faced increasing challenges to his dominance in the bolita trade from Italian gangsters. The Prohibition era had seen Italians amass wealth and power through bootlegging, leading some to seek a share of the lucrative bolita trade monopolized by Wall and the Cuban community. As with any reign at the zenith, cracks were beginning to show in Wall's dominance. The once seemingly invulnerable Wall was now encountering signs of a shifting tide. The entrenched establishment, led by figures like Charlie Wall and the established gambling syndicates, found themselves confronted by emerging crime groups. Ybor City emerged as the primary battleground, with the coveted prize being the most lucrative racket in Tampa, bolita. As bolita and other emerging rackets grew more lucrative, Wall's grip on the local underworld weakened. The increasing wealth was too vast for any single group to monopolize. Independent operators, and those backed by Cuban interests, began to rise. Meanwhile, another formidable force was eyeing the city's underworld, the mafia, willing to employ any means necessary to seize control. Over the following 3 decades, Tampa would descend into what became known as the Era of Blood, marked by more than 25 gang-related assassinations. Victims included policemen, drug kingpins, gamblers, and even innocent bystanders, all falling to the blast of a shotgun. Charlie Wall's downfall initially began in 1934, when Claude Pepper and Park Trammell were competing for a state Senate seat, with Wall backing Trammell. It's unclear whether Trammell requested this support, but Wall's endorsement guaranteed Trammell's victory in Ybor City and Tampa. The only question was how many votes Wall would allow Pepper to receive. In one West Tampa district, Wall decreed that Pepper would get only 2 votes. Statewide, Pepper lost by 3,000 votes, with a 6,000 vote deficit in Ybor City and West Tampa. This marked Wall's peak influence, as he had secured a statewide election for his candidate. Florida was embarrassed by this incident and vowed to prevent further election corruption in Tampa. In the 1935 mayoral election between D.B. McKay and Robert E. Chauncey, the National Guard was deployed to guard the ballot boxes. Despite the military presence, Wall's supporters attempted to stuff the ballot boxes, leading to chaos. Riots broke out, poll workers were threatened, and dozens of men, including Wall's old friend George Saturday Zarate, were arrested for repeat voting. During this turmoil, a hurricane with winds over 100 miles per hour hit Florida. By the time the election chaos and the hurricane subsided, Tampa's infrastructure and reputation were in ruins. The election made national headlines, and the city, embarrassed, decided to end the corruption by replacing the paper ballot system with lever machines. This change prevented Wall from hand-picking city leaders. No longer protected by the city and no longer untouchable, Wall saw other criminal syndicates, particularly the mafia, begin to flourish. Charlie Wall remained at the helm of the largest gang, overseeing gambling operations across several counties from 1920 to 1945, including Pinellas, Pasco, Polk, Hernando, and the Hillsborough County. Alongside Wall were Cuban operators, Anglos, and various independent operators, not aligned with any specific gang. During this period, the mafia's influence steadily grew. Ignazio Italiano and Joe Vallica were believed to be early mob powers, although Italiano passed away just 2 years after a significant raid in 1930. At a mob summit in Atlantic City, the Dichidou family, led by Alfonso and his sons Frank, Gaetano, and Antonio, asserted their claim to leadership of the Tampa Mafia with the backing of prominent New York mob boss Vincent Mangano. The first boss of the Tampa crime family, Ignazio Antinori, and his sons had extensive connections, including ties to Cuba. According to Antinori's descendants, his network extended to Florida's governor, Dave Schultz, as well as the local sheriff, state attorney, and police chief. But there was another influential family in the local rackets, a family name that would become synonymous with the Tampa Mafia. Santo Trafficante Sr. was the patriarch of this family. In Tampa, it wouldn't take long before bodies started piling up. In October 1928, Norris McFall was shot and killed. As the owner of the infamous bar, the Jack-O-Lantern, McFall had drastically shifted from his former career in law enforcement to supplying liquor, women, and bolita. However, he ran afoul of Charlie Wall and suffered the consequences. This incident marked Tampa's first widely publicized gangland murder. In addition to bolita and bootlegging, insurance fraud through arson emerged as a lucrative criminal activity in late 1920s and early 1930s Tampa. The Great Depression led to many people being forced to sell their homes at significant losses, making them more affordable for underworld figures to purchase. Racketeers would quickly buy these homes, sometimes even furnishing them. Subsequently, fires, often in unoccupied buildings, would occur, and the insurance payouts would end up in the pockets of local criminals. In 1931, arson was responsible for over 85% of fire damage in the city. Various local criminal groups, including the Mafia, were involved in this scheme, finding insurance fraud to be a profitable addition to their bolita rackets. To combat the epidemic of fires, Fire Chief A.J. White took action, enlisting the help of Angelo Lazzara, a resident of Ybor City and a salesman for a motor oil company. White knew Lazzara had connections in the underworld and could provide valuable information to the fire department. Lazzara began working undercover, but his involvement in the arson investigation was quickly leaked to the criminal underworld. Tragedy struck on the night of July 27, 1931, when Angelo Lazzara was driving his black sedan along 29th Street and 21st Avenue in Ybor. As he approached an intersection, another car pulled up beside him. Witnesses reported hearing 2 shotgun blasts, which shattered Lazzara's driver's side window. Both shots hit him, shattering his left shoulder, breaking his neck and piercing his brain, killing him instantly. Following Lazzara's death, the spate of arson fires persisted until the autumn of 1931, when an Ybor City apartment building became engulfed in a dramatic blaze, reducing it to ash. During their inspection of the adjacent building, firefighters discovered incendiary materials in the apartments, indicating a planned conflagration. Rather than immediately acting on this discovery, the police opted to stake out the area, hoping to catch the perpetrators in the act. Despite the slim odds of success, 2 weeks later, a second apartment erupted in flames. Police swiftly apprehended several suspects fleeing the scene. Ultimately, 7 men, including mobster Mario Perla, were indicted for the arson. The prosecution's case against the men was not initially robust. However, the testimony of Gus Perez, a Cuban-born furniture dealer in Ybor City, provided the necessary impetus for the prosecution to secure a conviction. Perez's testimony, combined with the physical evidence, strengthened the case considerably, leading to the men's guilty verdict and subsequent imprisonment. It is worth noting that both Angelo Lazzara and Mario Perla were associates of Santo Trafficante Sr. With Angelo Lazzara's assassination in 1931, the next killing linked to the era of blood unfolded a year later. The victim, Armando Valdez, was rumored to be connected to Bolita operations. On the night of September 26, 1932, 2 gunmen invaded Valdez's home. They gained entry through the kitchen window, where they encountered Valdez's wife. At gunpoint, they led her into the living room. The assailants shoved Valdez against the wall, then shot and killed him. The police swiftly responded to the shooting, and within days they charged 3 suspects, including Mario Zarate, the half-brother of narcotics kingpin George Saturday Zarate. Following a trial in 1932, all 3 were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. On July 24, 1936, Gus Perez was driving along 15th Street near Buffalo Avenue in Ybor City, accompanied by 2 female companions when a dark sedan pulled up alongside his car. Perez likely never saw it coming. The gunmen fired 2 shots. One tore a hole in the side of the car, while the other blasted off the back of Perez's head. The attack occurred 5 years after Perez testified in the arson case. Notably, the men he helped convict had recently been released from prison, suggesting a possible motive. These assassinations, while brutal and impactful on those involved, primarily targeted lower-ranking peripheral figures. However, as the power dynamics evolved, leaders within Charlie Wall's gang, the Cuban Syndicate, and the Mafia grew increasingly uneasy. It was only a matter of time before moves would be made against their higher echelons. In January 1937, Eddie Virella, a gambling house proprietor in Ybor City, was fatally shot. Virella was a trusted lieutenant in the Charlie Wall organization, serving under Evaristo Tito Rubio, one of Wall's key associates. Together, Rubio and Virella operated the Lincoln Club, one of Tampa's largest and most renowned gambling establishments. A reason for Virella's murder was Charlie Wall believed Eddie Virella had taken money from their gambling operations, leading to Virella's murder. Wall used this incident to blame the Antinoris faction, using it as a pretext to retaliate. 6 months later, Wall retaliated by killing Joe Valleca. In July 1937, Joe Valleca, described by an informant years later as definitely a member years ago of the Italian group referred to as the Mafia, died in a hail of shots poured from shotguns wielded by assassins in a passing car. On March 9, 1938, Eddie Virella's associate, Evaristo Tito Rubio, who resided just a few blocks away from him, was gunned down. Rubio returned home, dropped off by his bodyguard. As he opened his door, Two assailants fired 3 shots, fatally striking him. On June 3, 1939, Charlie Wall narrowly escaped a fatal attack when assassins fired 5 loads of buckshot into his car, just a block away from his home. He managed to evade the worst of the assault by slumping under the dashboard, but sustained a wound to his right shoulder. The assailants, shooting from a truck, drove the vehicle to a field at 13th Street and 25th Avenue, where they doused it with gasoline and set it ablaze. Wall kept silent, and no witnesses came forward to provide an account of the shooting. However, police managed to trace the truck used in the incident back to the Antinoris. 2 months prior to the Wall shooting, Carl Caramusa, a member of the Antinori De Simone Impostato drug ring, had traveled to Tampa with James De Simone. Ignazio Antinori gave Caramusa cash to purchase a panel-body Ford truck, the same vehicle used in the attempt on Wall. Caramusa later disclosed this information to federal narcotics agents, identifying De Simone and Impostato as the hitmen. Despite this, neither were charged for the shooting. After completing his 5-year sentence for his involvement in the arson ring, responsible for the murders of Angelo Lazzara and Gus Perez, Mario Perla re-entered the numbers racket, asserting his presence in the Tampa underworld. On the evening of October 12, 1939, while Ignazio Antinori and his son Joe were away, Perla was driving home with his wife when another vehicle waited until they crossed an intersection, then accelerated to pull alongside them. Gunmen in the vehicle fired 4 shotgun blasts at Perla's vehicle. Mrs. Perla had ducked down after the first shot. Perla was rushed to a nearby hospital, but was pronounced dead upon arrival. Later, Johnny Scarface Rivera, one of Charlie Wall's bodyguards, provided insider information about the killing, revealing that he had followed the hitman to ensure the job was carried out smoothly. Initial suspicion surrounding the hit on Joe Vallica pointed towards the Mafia as the likely culprits. A witness who saw the getaway car noted the first 3 letters of the license plate, which corresponded to cars owned by mob figures Nick Scaglione and Antonino DiCidu. However, it is more probable that Charlie Wall was behind the hit. While the Vallica killing was a significant achievement, Wall was beginning to feel the pressure from the Mafia's encroachment on his operations. In later years, Charlie Wall testified before the Kefauver Commission, stating that by the early 1940s, the Mafia had significantly gained control over many illegal gambling operations, effectively squeezing him out of the picture. The Antinoris were involved in drug trafficking along the East Coast, extending to Chicago, where they were respected by Al Capone. Ignazio Antinori also participated in Bolita, acting as a banker for sellers in Ybor City. He cultivated relationships with influential judges and politicians, who appreciated his support and offered him protection from law enforcement. In early 1940, Ignazio shipped drugs to Chicago, sourced from his regular Cuban suppliers. However, upon arrival, the Chicago mob found the quality unsatisfactory and demanded a refund. Ignazio, believing he was justified, refused, not anticipating that the Chicago mob would resolve the issue in Tampa. On October 23, 1940, Ignazio visited his son's club, the Saratoga Bar, with a young female companion. They later picked up Vincenzo James Fraterigo, a local gambling figure, and stopped at the Mecca, an Ybor City club that Ignazio was renovating. While seated near the front window of the Palm Garden Inn, sipping coffee, an assailant approached from outside and fired a shotgun, hitting Ignazio in the face and causing severe injuries. Police recovered a 16-gauge Browning shotgun from the scene, which was traced back to a store in New Orleans, where it had been purchased under the name of John Adams. Despite efforts to follow leads, including those from the Kefauver hearings in 1950, the case of Antinori's murder remained unsolved. While the hearings attributed his killing to the failed drug shipment, others viewed it as part of the ongoing battle for control of the Bolita rackets. The state attorney at the time believed there was a connection between Antinori's murder and the killing of Mario Perla the previous year. There was also speculation that Charlie Wall may have placed a contract on Antinori. Allegedly, Wall was displeased with Antinori's gambling operations at the Trocadero, a nightclub he owned near the La Unione Italiana, where Antinori was influential. With Antinoris connections, including having the sheriff in his favor, Wall and Santo Trafficante Sr. might have perceived him as a threat. After Ignacio Antinoris' death, his sons took over the drug trade. In 1942, a significant mafia-operated narcotics ring was uncovered in Kansas City. Among those charged were Paul and Joe Antinori. Two other men charged were James DeSimone and Nicola Impastato, associates of the Antinoris, who were believed to be responsible for the 1939 attempted assassination of Charlie Wall. Paul and Joe were both sentenced to federal prison, primarily based on the testimony of Carl Caramusa and another informant. Caramusa, however, was killed a few years later. Salvatore Red Italiano capitalized on the void left by the Antinoris and became the Trafficante's main rival for leadership in the local mafia. The gang conflicts weakened Charlie Wall's influence over the criminal enterprises. By the late 1940s, Wall's control over his former political ties had greatly diminished. A now powerless Charlie Wall left Tampa for Miami and faded into retirement. For a man who had been accustomed to living in the public eye and being treated like royalty wherever he went, this new life of obscurity was a difficult adjustment. In 1950, the Special Committee to Investigate Organized Crime, known as the Key-Farver Committee, swept through the nation. To combat the organized crime racket infiltrating major cities across the United States, Senator Estes Key-Farver formed this committee, which traveled to the most corrupt cities, subpoenaing notorious individuals and questioning them under oath about the local criminal syndicates. While most individuals denied any involvement in corrupt activities, one person in Tampa willingly testified about his role in the city's underworld, Charlie Wall. Returning to the public eye for the first time since leaving Tampa, the now retired and powerless Wall openly discussed his former life as a crime lord in Tampa. His revelations about the Tampa Mafia were broadcast nationwide in December 1950, and Tampa was put under the spotlight. Salvatore Red Italiano's right-hand man and protege at the time was James Head of the Elks Lumia. However, after Red Italiano received his subpoenas, he fled to Italy, leaving Lumia in charge. Lumia's reign wouldn't last long, as on June 5, 1950, he was shot and killed with a shotgun. This now left Santo Trafficante Sr. as the primary organized crime figure in Tampa. But by the mid-50s, Santo Trafficante Jr., who had by then taken over the Trafficante crime family, was at the top of his game in Cuba. Charlie Wall was still around, and although he did not pose a serious threat to Santo Jr.'s power, he was making waves. On April 18, 1955, Charlie Wall began his evening in his usual manner, visiting his favorite local bars. His bodyguard, Joe Pelusa Diaz, was not with him. Earlier that evening, Wall was seen walking near Tampa City Hall and appeared to be intoxicated. Mobster Nick Scaglione, a friend, spotted Wall and offered him a ride, which Wall accepted. Scaglione drove him to the Dream Bar, his establishment where Wall entertained other patrons with stories from his past. After a few drinks, Scaglione drove Wall home. 2 days later, Wall's wife found him lying face up on the floor. Nearby were a pair of slippers. Wall had his throat cut from ear to ear. He had been beaten with a baseball bat and stabbed 10 times. His revolver was found on the nightstand. Next to that, a copy of Estes Key-Farver's book, which was a summary of his findings on the hearings on organized crime. Some speculated that Wall's murder was retaliation for his testimony before the Key-Farver Commission 5 years earlier. However, his testimony hadn't incriminated anyone, as it mostly reiterated public records. Although Wall retired from criminal activities with wealth and his life intact, he harbored resentment towards the Trafficantes. Wall once wrote a detailed letter outlining the local mafia structure, which he kept for insurance. The letter eventually reached the Tampa Police Department, and while it was mentioned in subsequent congressional hearings, its exact contents were never revealed.